The morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and golden. Helen sat by the window, watching the world wake up slowly. Her knees ached, a quiet reminder of years spent walking, teaching, living. She sighed, wrapping her hands around a warm cup of tea. The garden outside called to her, roses waiting for their gentle care. But bending down had become harder, almost impossible these days. She missed feeling the soil between her fingers, the rhythm of movement. Each step now came with hesitation, a careful balance of strength and fear. She thought about the days she used to dance in the kitchen, barefoot and free. How did time slip by so quietly, she wondered. Her doctor had told her, "Movement is life, Helen, don't stop moving." But where should she begin when even standing felt heavy? Then, one morning, she heard a friend mention a class for seniors. Simple exercises, she said, gentle bends to bring back circulation. Helen wasn't sure, but something inside whispered try. And that small whisper was enough to change everything. Because sometimes, healing begins not with medicine, but with a single brave motion. Helen arrived at the community center on a quiet Tuesday morning. The air smelled faintly of coffee and linoleum, familiar and comforting. She clutched her small water bottle, feeling both curious and uncertain. Around her, a few other seniors gathered, chatting softly, adjusting their mats. Some smiled warmly, others looked just as nervous as she felt. A woman with silver hair waved at her, inviting her to sit nearby. "First time?" she asked kindly, and Helen nodded with a shy laugh. The instructor entered with a calm voice and gentle energy. "Today," he said, "we move slowly, we breathe deeply, we listen to our bodies." Helen liked that. No pressure, no judgment, just movement at her own rhythm. The first few stretches felt awkward, her knees stiff like old hinges. Her balance wavered as she tried to bend slightly toward her toes. The muscles behind her legs protested, but she kept breathing, slow and steady. The instructor reminded them, "It's not about touching your toes, it's about connecting." Helen let the words sink in, her breath sinking with the quiet room. Every inhale felt like a small invitation to trust her body again. She bent her knees gently, exhaling through the motion. Her feet pressed firmly into the floor, grounding her. The movement was small but powerful, like waking something that had been asleep. She could feel warmth spreading through her legs, a soft tingling flow. Her heart beat in rhythm with her breath, calm yet alive. The instructor smiled, noticing her effort. "That's it, Helen, small steps count." She didn't even realize he knew her name, but it made her feel seen. Around her, laughter filled the space as others found their balance. One man wobbled and caught himself on a chair, joking as the group chuckled. The energy felt light, safe, full of encouragement. Helen realized she wasn't alone in her struggle. Each person carried their own story, their own reason for being here. One woman was recovering from hip surgery. Another wanted to keep up with her grandkids. Every story began with the same desire, to keep moving, to stay free. As the session went on, Helen noticed her fear slowly fading. The stiffness in her knees eased just a little. Her back straightened, her shoulders relaxed. There was something deeply healing in these small motions. The instructor guided them through the final stretch, reminding everyone to smile. Helen felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet pride blooming. She had come in unsure, but she was leaving a little lighter. After class, she sat beside the silver-haired woman again. "You did great," the woman said, sipping her water. Helen smiled, feeling her knees hum softly beneath her skirt. "I didn't think I could," she admitted. The woman nodded knowingly. "That's how it starts, one bend, one breath at a time." Outside, the sun was brighter, the air fresher somehow. Helen walked slowly toward the parking lot, her steps steady and sure. She wasn't healed yet, not completely. But she was moving, and that, she thought, was the beginning of everything. The next morning, Helen woke earlier than usual, the air still cool and soft. Her body felt different, slightly lighter, as if the night had carried something away. She stood by her bed, stretched her arms overhead, and smiled at the quiet. Her knees still whispered with stiffness, but there was no sharp protest this time. She remembered the instructor's words, "Small moves awaken big changes." That phrase echoed in her mind like a promise she could almost touch. So she cleared a small space in her living room and began again. Feet shoulder-width apart, shoulders relaxed, hands resting gently by her sides. She inhaled slowly, bending her knees just a little, feeling her balance shift. Her heels pressed into the ground as her body found its rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, an honest conversation between her and her body. She bent down carefully, reaching toward her toes without forcing anything. Her breath guided her, calm and even, like the tide moving in and out. When she stood again, she felt her heart beat stronger, her blood flowing freely. Her legs tingled, alive in a way they hadn't been for years. It wasn't just exercise anymore, it was rediscovering. A reconnection with the parts of herself that time had quietly silenced. Later that day, she told her daughter about the class over the phone. Her daughter's voice carried both surprise and pride. "Mom, that's amazing." Helen laughed softly. "It's just bending and breathing, but it feels like more." That night, she found herself searching online about gentle movements for seniors. She learned how simple motions like knee-to-toe bends improve circulation, how they bring oxygen to the muscles, loosen joints, and strengthen balance. Each article seemed to confirm what she had already begun to feel inside. Her body wasn't giving up. It was waiting to be cared for again. By the third day, Helen returned to class with new energy. The group greeted her warmly, their faces now familiar and comforting. They started with breathing again, then slow bends in unison like a quiet dance. The instructor walked among them, reminding, "Listen to your knees, they'll guide you." Helen smiled as she moved, realizing she could bend a little deeper this time. The tension behind her legs eased with every breath, every gentle push. A warm pulse traveled from her knees to her feet, spreading through her body. The instructor demonstrated how to shift the weight slowly from heels to toes. "This is how you build flow," he said. "Circulation follows confidence." Helen felt that truth in every cell of her being. She no longer worried about doing it perfectly. She just moved. After class, she noticed her steps were smoother, her stride more natural. Her reflection in the mirror looked softer, yet stronger somehow. She realized she had begun something that wasn't just physical. It was emotional, even spiritual, a quiet reclaiming of her independence. The world outside hadn't changed, but her perspective had. For the first time in a long time, Helen didn't just exist, she moved with purpose. And with each bend from knee to toe, she whispered to herself, "I'm still growing." Helen had always believed that healing came from medicine, not movement. But the more she practiced, the more she began to feel something changing inside. It wasn't just her legs growing stronger, it was her whole body waking up. She could feel warmth rising from her knees to her thighs, like sunlight under her skin. Her doctor had once explained how blood carries energy to every part of the body. Now, for the first time, she could actually feel that energy flowing through her. Each bend toward her toes sent a quiet pulse of life up her spine. Her breathing became smoother, her chest rising and falling like gentle waves. She didn't rush, didn't force. She simply followed the rhythm of her own body. The instructor once told them, "When you move, your blood smiles." Helen had laughed at that, but now it made perfect sense. The warmth she felt wasn't just physical, it was joy moving through her veins. Her joints no longer creaked as loudly in the morning. The tightness that used to live behind her knees began to soften. Even her feet, often cold and numb, felt alive and present again. She learned how every bend squeezed and released the muscles gently. That simple act helped the blood flow freely, nourishing the tissues and nerves. Movement, she realized, was the body's natural way of saying thank you. The science of it fascinated her, even if she didn't know all the details. She imagined her blood as a quiet river, carrying warmth wherever it went. Each motion stirred that river, keeping it from turning still or stagnant. She understood now why the instructor kept saying, "Keep it flowing." One day after class, Helen stayed behind to talk to him. "How does something so small make such a difference?" she asked. He smiled, folding his hands, because motion speaks the language of the body. He explained how bending the knees activates the largest muscles in the legs. When those muscles contract and release, they pump blood back toward the heart. It's nature's built-in system, a living circulation pump inside each of us. Helen listened, amazed that something so gentle could be so powerful. The instructor added softly, "Your body remembers how to heal. You just need to remind it." Those words stayed with her long after she left the building. That evening, as she moved through her routine, she felt gratitude in every breath. She imagined her heart thanking her knees thanking her feet. Every part of her body working together, rediscovering harmony. The aches that once frightened her now felt like signals, not enemies. Her body wasn't broken. It was simply asking to be moved with kindness. As she finished her final bend, she stood tall and exhaled deeply. Her reflection in the mirror looked brighter, her posture straighter, her eyes calm. She realized that science and spirit were not separate after all. They met here in this quiet motion, from knee to toe, breath to heartbeat. And as her blood flowed freely once again, Helen whispered, "This is what life feels like." Despite her progress, Helen still had moments of hesitation. Some mornings, her knees felt heavier, and fear crept quietly into her thoughts. "What if I push too hard?" she whispered to herself, touching her leg gently. The old doubts returned, reminding her of past pains and lost balance. She had fallen once before, a small slip that left a long shadow in her mind. Ever since then, fear had lived beside her, whispering caution into every movement. But deep down, Helen knew fear could not be her final companion. She remembered her instructor's calm voice saying, "Courage doesn't mean no fear, it means moving with it." So she decided to meet her fear with patience instead of resistance. She brought a sturdy chair into her living room, placing it beside her mat. It stood there like a quiet friend, ready to catch her if she needed. With that comfort nearby, Helen began her routine again, slower this time. Her hands rested lightly on the chair's back, her breath long and steady. Each bend forward felt like a small negotiation between fear and trust. Her muscles trembled at first, unsure whether to hold or to let go. But she reminded herself, slow is still movement, small is still progress. The more she practiced, the quieter her doubts became. Her body started to remember what balance felt like before the fear. She found that if she focused on her breath, her legs followed naturally. The rhythm of inhale and exhale became her invisible guide. One morning during class, the instructor asked them to close their eyes. "Feel your body sway," he said softly. "Trust that it knows how to stand." Helen hesitated, but she obeyed, keeping one hand near the chair. Her knees bent slightly, her toes gripped the mat, her breath deepened. For a brief moment, she felt weightless, perfectly balanced between earth and air. When she opened her eyes, she realized she hadn't needed the chair at all. A smile spread slowly across her face, gentle and proud. After class, the instructor approached her with a knowing nod. "You're learning to trust yourself again," he said. Helen felt warmth rise in her chest, more powerful than any medicine. It wasn't just her body healing, it was her confidence returning. That evening she told her reflection, fear doesn't go away, it just becomes smaller. She looked at her knees, at the faint scars of years gone by, and felt gratitude. They had carried her through life, through laughter and through loss. They had never truly failed her. They had only needed her attention. Now with each careful bend, she was saying thank you to them. Her fear still visited sometimes, but it no longer ruled her movements. It stood quietly in the corner, watching her dance with calm determination. Because Helen had learned the secret, fear fades when movement begins. And every gentle bend from knee to toe was her way of saying, I am still strong. Over the next few weeks, Helen found herself looking forward to every class. The community center no longer felt like a strange place. It felt like home. Each morning she was greeted with smiles, laughter, and the smell of brewed tea. There was comfort in the rhythm of familiar faces, moving together in quiet harmony. Beside her stood Margaret, the silver-haired woman who had welcomed her on the first day. They often shared soft jokes before class, their laughter echoing through the room. Across the space, George stretched carefully, counting under his breath with focus. He had been recovering from knee surgery and moved with steady determination. Next to him, Clara adjusted her chair, humming to herself before each bend. Everyone there carried a story of pain, healing, and quiet resilience. The class wasn't just about movement anymore. It was about belonging. Helen realized that each person inspired the other simply by showing up. When one of them wobbled, the others offered a hand or an encouraging smile. When someone struggled, the group clapped softly at their effort, not their perfection. The instructor often said, "This isn't a competition, it's a celebration." Helen loved that idea. Every stretch a celebration of what their bodies could still do. During one session, the music played softly in the background, a slow piano tune. The group moved in near unison, breathing together, bending gracefully. Helen looked around and saw not frailty, but quiet strength in every face. Wrinkles shone with sweat, but also with pride and a certain kind of beauty. These were not just seniors exercising, they were humans reclaiming motion. In those moments, Helen felt a connection deeper than words could describe. When the class ended, no one rushed to leave. They lingered, sharing stories. Margaret talked about her grandchildren, how she could now kneel to play again. George smiled as he mentioned he could finally walk without his cane some days. Clara laughed, saying she hadn't slept this well in years since joining. Helen listened, her heart swelling with quiet gratitude. It was as if each of them had found a small miracle in the same room. They exchanged recipes, old jokes, even gardening tips after class. Sometimes they sat outside together, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Helen often thought how strange it was that movement had brought them so close. What began as exercise had turned into friendship, and friendship into healing. She noticed how laughter seemed to make her bends easier, her breath longer. The joy of community had become another kind of medicine, soft but powerful. On her way home, Helen realized she no longer practiced alone. Even when she moved in her living room, she could feel the group with her. Their encouragement, their stories, their warmth traveled with every breath. The room at the community center was more than a place to move. It had become a sanctuary of hope, where every heartbeat mattered. And Helen, once afraid of bending her knees, now looked forward to every step. Because now she knew, healing wasn't just about muscles or blood flow. It was about the people who moved beside her, reminding her she was never alone. It had been 3 months since Helen first stepped into that community room. The days felt lighter now, her mornings filled with calm and purpose. She no longer dreaded the ache in her knees. It had become a gentle teacher. Each stretch, each bend, carried a rhythm her body now understood deeply. When she moved, she no longer thought of age or limitation. She thought of freedom, of strength returning slowly but surely to her bones. Her reflection in the mirror no longer showed weakness. It showed quiet pride. Her posture stood taller, her steps more confident, her smile more frequent. The fear that once followed her had softened into a distant memory. Her knees, once stubborn and stiff, now bent with ease and grace. Helen began to notice small miracles in her daily life. She could crouch to tie her shoes without holding onto the chair. She could reach the lower shelves in her kitchen again. And most precious of all, she could kneel in her garden beside her roses. The earth felt cool beneath her hands as she tended to the blooms. Each petal seemed brighter, each color more alive than she remembered. The garden had waited for her return, patient and forgiving. She whispered softly to herself, "I made it back." It wasn't a grand victory, but to Helen, it was everything. Her neighbors noticed too. They saw her walking to the market again, a small bag of apples swinging at her side. They greeted her with joy, surprised at the energy in her stride. Helen laughed, telling them it was just a little exercise and a lot of patience. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. It was rediscovering. One afternoon, during class, the instructor invited everyone to reflect on their journey. He asked them to share one thing they had gained since they began. Margaret said, "I gained strength." George smiled, "I gained courage." When it was Helen's turn, she paused, thinking for a moment. Then she said softly, "I gained trust, in my body, in myself." The room grew quiet, her words settling like sunlight on still water. The instructor nodded gently, eyes warm with pride. Helen felt a lump in her throat, realizing how far she had come. Not just in movement, but in spirit. She had walked from fear to freedom, one slow bend at a time. That evening she stood by her window again, watching the sunset. The same golden light that once felt distant now filled her heart with peace. Her knees felt strong beneath her, her balance sure and steady. She whispered a quiet thank you to her body, her friends, and her courage. She knew life would still bring aches and pauses, as it always did. But she also knew she had learned how to listen, how to move through them gently. For every bend from knee to toe was no longer a task, but a reminder. A reminder that growth never stops, even when years have passed. And as the evening light faded into night, Helen smiled and whispered, "Every bend is a beginning, and I am still beginning." The night was calm, the air gentle against Helen's skin. She stood by her garden, the moonlight resting softly on her roses. The world felt quiet, but inside her, everything was alive. Her knees bent easily now, her body moving with quiet confidence. She thought about the journey, the fear, the slow mornings, the laughter. Every small bend, every careful breath had brought her here. It wasn't just about exercise, it was about believing again. Believing that her body still had stories left to live. That her heart could still find rhythm in the simplest motion. She took one last deep breath, feeling the cool air fill her chest. Then she whispered, "Thank you, not to anyone but to life itself." Because healing, she had learned, wasn't something that happened all at once. It was something that unfolded gently, like petals opening to morning light. Helen smiled, knowing tomorrow she would bend again, slow and steady. The garden waited, the world waited, and she was ready to move. Not to reach perfection, but to keep flowing, keep living, keep beginning. And as the stars shimmered above her, she whispered softly, "Movement is life, and I'm still moving."